Good morning. I'm Mark Allen of Gaper LLC, and I'm here today with Lou Musante, the founder of Echo Strategies. Good afternoon in your case, Lou. How you doing?
Good afternoon, Mark. It's a good day, even in spite of the new normal, as we call it now.
Yes, the new normal is quite interesting. So, can you share a brief background of yourself and your work experience?
Sure. I lived rural on a dairy farm growing up, and then I moved to an urban environment and actually grew up on the streets. In high school, I was a jock who loved wrestling, but I had a passion for science and technology. And that interest, I was lucky enough, gave me some scholarships that paid for 2.5 degrees because I never did finish that PhD in chemistry, but I was fortunate enough to grab a master's in library and information science in the 70s and got turned on to online databases and the internet. And jumped out of academia, turned down the job at MIT because of the politics, and then went the corporate route. General Tire and Rubber's Research Center, went up to Boston to Arthur D. Little, which was an early on McKinsey, and then got recruited back to Pittsburgh and ran a NASA Technology Transfer Center and worked out of here since. And so the way I summarize it, the 70s for me were chemistry and drug discovery, both the good kind and the crazy kind. The 80s, I met a serial entrepreneur in Pittsburgh, and we got into database marketing. The 90s, we got into measurement. We service marked the term customer listening. The 2000s, we got turned on to organizational culture, the measurement aspect of it. It's a complex problem. How do you measure and define the culture of an organization? That's still a tough one. But then in 15, I went back into entrepreneurship from a service business and started a healthcare company and focused on the culture of innovation. Now that healthcare company's up and running, we're turning back to innovation. And as I mentioned to you in our warm-ups, have a great project going with the Carnegie Mellon University Corporate Startup Lab in their Tepper Business School on corporate entrepreneurship and how it enables transformational innovations, the type of innovation that's being catalyzed by this corona.
Wow, you have a very varied background. Very interesting. So, what has been your experience with remote employment, both as a remote employee and a remote employer?
Yeah, my experience has mainly been as a remote employer. I remember the pre-email days and what it was like, and the telephone was your best friend, and you did secondary research in the library. But Echo Strategies has been virtual since 1999. Wasn't out of necessity. I think it was out of opportunity, where we've always had a what we call permanent part-time employee philosophy, remotes, mainly 1099 folks. And it was better for them to not have to commute. Most of them lived regionally. We pulled some in nationally, and we learned that we could have better meetings if we did them virtually. So we've learned a lot over the ways. We weren't very good back then, and we hope we're better now.
I would hope so. Yeah. Well, you're a veteran of it. You're probably, of all the people I've interviewed, been doing it the longest. What's been your takeaway from it now that you've been doing it for so long? Because you've probably seen it grow a lot.
Yeah, and I've been very fortunate in a lot of our career to have really good people around us and run into people smarter than us who are willing to share. And I can say that video today is much better than doing teleconferences back then. And, I think we found out that if you help people, like I'm interested about your employees and how you train them to be better virtual employees, and because if you take the technology as a given,
right.
Without the technology, that doesn't happen. But leading from a distance is still more of an art than a science, and helping people understand netiquette or virtual meeting etiquette, if you will. So, we've picked up some tricks along the way.
Yes, I would imagine you have. So what do you think is the future of remote employment, and what do you think can be done to make it even more effective?
I was alluding to there, I think better training employees how to be good remote employees. If you look at Microsoft the past 10 days, the number of Microsoft Teams users went up exponentially, ninefold, I heard, ninefold. And I just wonder what kind of training is going along with that. And are we going to take our same bad habits from face-to-face meetings to virtual meetings? Because I believe virtual meetings are a lot tougher.
They're tougher, but I think because of that, they tend to be more effective. So.
Well, I don't know. A lot of the virtual meetings that I'm on from the client side, if you will, I see they can be improved. I'll give you a checklist of what we do for a good virtual meeting. All I need to do is look at somebody's agenda and understand if they've done a lot of virtual meetings, at least from our approach. We think they need to be shorter. They need to be timed. We think people need to understand their role on there. Usually we assign a role, someone to manage the clock, somebody to catch takeaways, not notes as much as what decisions have been made and what are the action items coming out of it, who's going to do what by when. And I think if you practice those fundamentals, I remember when I first got trained by someone in this, I brought her into Heinz R&D, very proud to get her in the door. She said, well, I'll observe a meeting and help you understand how you can help your customers be better at telework, is what they called it then. She was there about 10 minutes and got up and left, and I had her there for an hour, and I thought, what happened? So afterwards, I said, what happened? She goes, well, I saw enough. And she looked at the agenda, looked at what they were doing. It had a major impact on them, so much that they even funded her. Now, this was back probably in 2012 or 15, to do a thing on Second Life, if you've ever heard of Second Life. When you think about the future of remote work, Second Life was a community where you went in and you bought space, you created avatars. So we created a whole virtual R&D fair. So the R&D scientists from Heinz around the world didn't have to come together, but they made an icon, an avatar. They would show their presentations online. It was really very interesting. Second Life, it came out of San Francisco. I don't know. I think it's still around, but it never caught on. It was ahead of its time, so to speak.
Yes. So what's the story behind Echo Strategies, and what's the journey been like?
The journey has been a good journey. I think we're a lot smarter than we were many decades ago. We've always been a user of technology, as I mentioned. Back in the 80s, database marketing. I mean, I was fortunate enough to get turned to online databases. This is that's when you had an IBM AT. And prior to that, I'd carry what was called a KSR terminal route, keyboard send receive. You plug the phone into that baby, and I was really privileged in Boston because I had one that ran at 1,200 baud. 120 characters a second. People would come around the desk to see it because it printed bidirectionally on this thermal paper. And you paid connect times of dollars a minute to get into, like at Dun & Bradstreet, to do screening. But if you thought about the way they searched back in those days with needles and in the stacks of a library, what a typical research assistant could do in an hour or 10 hours, we could do in 1 hour and better. So we used that for the database marketing. That helped us really understand, I think, opportunities in the research area, and we got into helping people listen to their customers. You know, that was the quality days when you could do customer satisfaction and drive improvements. And I think after we saw giving people good research and not so much using it, we got into organizational culture and leadership development. Since then, I've focused mainly in the innovation area. So helping people understand the culture of an R&D organization, how do I measure success, and that led to some of the work we're doing at Carnegie Mellon now. In parallel with that, we took a break in 2015 and started Echo Healthcare, mainly to take what we had learned in listening and engagement and marketing and focused on transferring that knowledge to the healthcare sector and helping people better engage patients in their healthcare. I probably spend half of my time in that now and half of my time on this transformational innovation work.
Very interesting. So how have you incorporated the idea of remote working into Echo Strategies? Since you did it, it sounds like you've done it from day one, correct?
In the database marketing company we had in the 80s was a physical company. I think we had ended up around 20 full-time people, sold it to an ad agency. But we learned all the things that you don't have to do. Build a big overhead. You know, as I mentioned now, everybody's a permanent part-time employee. I think we probably gave out 30 1099s last year. So we're not a big company, but we tend to work mainly with Fortune 500s and divisions of those, 60% in Pittsburgh, 40% out of the region. And we take a lot of things we've learned over the years to them, like leading from a distance. You know, once you understand the meeting, the basics of telemeetings or virtual meetings, even using a video, I think you then get into how do you establish trust in a team? How do you build trust in a team where many of the employees may never meet each other physically? One of the advantages many of our Fortune clients have is we work with global R&D teams. They'll get them together once a year. Used to be twice a year in them budgets, but just that physical meeting face to face for 15 minutes, let alone a day, just enriches that relationship so much in the openness and trust. If you think about a lot of the meetings you're in virtually and somebody says, well, does anybody have any questions? Dead air.
Yeah.
What we've learned is techniques like you got to go around the horn. You got to make sure you're fair and bring everybody into it. So there's some really great models for building trust in virtual environments. So that's some of the stuff we've taken over.
Well, that's great advice. Now that we're in the current situation with the pandemic, have you noticed any new roadblocks or challenges, or because you've been doing it for so long, it actually wasn't a big deal?
I think I heard one of your earlier podcasts, or maybe you have a great voice, by the way. I was just listening to the podcast, and I think the comment was, well, it took everybody about a week to get Zoom down, you know? So again, I think one of the prerequisites, if you have the technology, then I break it into two things. Do you know how to run a good virtual meeting? I think there's a lot of opportunity to improve there. And then very few leaders have been trained in trying to lead from a distance and building trust and giving feedback. So I see those as great opportunity areas. And I think from what I see, there's some good resources out there to help people do that. But it should be a productivity bust. You know, we've talked a lot about not how are we going to bounce back, but how are we going to bounce forward. And if you think of 3 of my 5 daughters were homeschooled, you know, of cyber school. So understanding the impact in education, the impact we're seeing in healthcare right now. One of our top clients is a leading producer of ventilators in the world. So what we've seen and going on right now in trying to help frontline professionals are going into the house. If they have to be in the house for an hour, how can we cut that time down in 30 minutes through using some of the healthcare programs we've developed, mobile-based, that kind of thing. So it's an interesting time, but I believe we'll bounce forward, and we're going to see it intersects with this transformational innovation. We're going to see some major transformations. It's going to be a rough few weeks or few months.
Yeah, it looks like at least we're on lockdown until May 3rd here in California. So at least another month for us.
Now, at least somebody got that message, you know.
Yeah.
If you know, I read some history of the Spanish flu, which took 50 million people globally, and there wasn't as many people in the world then. And it compared Philadelphia to St. Louis here in the States, and St. Louis got that early warning. And when you look at the statistics, they're order of magnitude difference in the two with only a 6-week time window. So let's hope a lot of the other governors and mayors have gotten that message, because what I see is some people are taking it serious and some aren't.
Yeah, I agree. And not to point fingers, but San Francisco went into lockdown. The whole Bay Area went into lockdown a week before New York. And actually the major employers in San Francisco told everyone to work from home a week before that.
Yeah.
It's made a big difference.
Oh, it has. Yeah. Compare that to LA.
Yeah, true. So there's companies like Gaper that help develop, build, and scale products. How important do you think such setups will be in the future for companies that look to hire mainly quality employees and in a hurry?
You know what, I think you're in the right place at the right time. I believe from looking at your materials, your 1%. I think one of the big values is the vetting that you do,
Hmm.
and enabling, whether it's startups or corporate. We follow a lot of our companies, and if they're going to hire, say, 100 people, they're going to hire 100 FTEs. They're going to hire, I'm sorry, if they're going to hire 100, probably a half of them might be FTEs, but then they're going to get contractors, and then they're going to get people offshore. So from what I see, I really like what you're doing. I look through your talent pool. I think it's important. And I'm not sure if your niche is startups, but I think that's an interesting position. I believe one of the ways we got connected was through some of the incubators here in Pittsburgh that we actually helped get a couple of them up and running 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think you're positioned very nicely. I don't know if you call it staff augmentation, but I think the 1% gets my attention, because I always say, what job are you doing? You're going to bring great talent to the table, but are you going to make it easy for me to hire that talent? And then what I'm asking people now, especially with remote and virtual employees, have you looked at retention? What are your retention rate like with customers? And have, say, you all trained your employees how to be better remote employees. It's not easy. And I think there's that each one teach one. If they go into these organizations, whether it's a startup or large corporation, and bring good manners and etiquette to the table, speaking virtually, it's going to help everybody.
Yeah, and our niche is startups, although the recent pandemic has actually helped us. We're looking more now at larger companies because they're starting to look at it too more seriously. And their needs are very much different. And I've worked for both startups and large companies, so I'm familiar with their challenges.
Yeah, and Dad, I could tell you're a vet, because when you segment those two markets, they're like night and day for sure.
Yeah, and they have different needs when it comes to remote employees. And to me, they're totally different, because generally with a startup, there's too much work to do. Whereas in the large companies, it's harder to keep the employee engaged, when you're one of 10,000 people.
Well, that's where I think the training can come in, both for the employer and the employee. On the startup side, I think many times it's trying to see what they'll delegate, and do they understand what they don't know. Large companies, at least, they may not delegate a lot of the high-end work, but they understand what needs to get done. And I like your position not only on vetting, but on speed.
Yeah.
Because speed is a differentiator today.
Yes, it is.
Look, I don't know if you look at the Fortune 500, you've seen some of these numbers that even if you look back 50 years ago, the company on the Fortune 500 was there about 60 years. Now it's 16 years and going down. So how do you reinvent yourself?
Yeah, this is true. Well, look at Uber. I mean, what are they? 5 years now?
Yeah.
And their headquarters is about 30 minutes from me.
Yeah.
So, well, Lou, this has been great. I'd like to thank you for your time today, and I wish Echo Strategies much luck in the future. And have a great day.
Okay, thank you for letting us share our story.
You're welcome.
Day and stay well.
Thank you. You too.